However, man. Huh? However. All right.
Check. Why don't you kick it off?
Yeah. All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. For everyone who's down here to see my talk, thank you. For everyone who's at the bar, because it's a shorter line than upstairs, thank you too. My name is Jamie Murdock. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Binary Defense Systems. A little bit about me, but not a lot because that's not really important. I've been doing this for about 18 years. Before I was a CISO over at Binary Defense, I worked at Dell SecureWorks. My job was to build security operations centers for Fortune 500s and also put in together the policies, procedures, who to work with, incident response plans, and all the other fun stuff that went along with it. So the reason I did this talk this way was I figured, sometimes people don't really have access to talk to their CISO or really get a good understanding of, what might be important to them or, understand why they make some decisions they do. So I figured, hey, this is a really cool venue. It's, pretty informal, so I can just, throw some answers out to any questions. And if you don't have a question to kick off, that's cool. We have a couple prepared. So that being said, who wants to be the first one to ask a question? Yes, sir.
How would you... Nope, not working. I'll just start I'll project.
That works.
Yeah. How would you recommend breaking into the information security industry as you could say hobbyist?
Mm-hmm.
What is the minimum qualification? Are certifications really necessary? Should you hack the CEO and leave him an email? How would you go about it?
Sure, great question. So the question was, how can you really break into information security as a hobbyist, for example, going from IT to throw that in there, or something similar to that. Certifications, are they important? What's important? Things like that. So the thing that I actually started to do when I made the transition from being a sysadmin into focusing on security was I sought out local groups. We're really fortunate here in Northeast Ohio. We have Northeast NEO InfoSec. If you haven't been there, definitely go. I learned a lot of people there. I learned a lot of information, and it really kind of gave me the start to focus on security. As far as certifications go, me personally, I'm not a big fan of a lot of certifications because, a lot of them are just, I'm going to cram this information into my brain and then I'm going to dump it on the test, but it doesn't really mean you actually learn the material. From an HR standpoint, though, there's a lot of times where people are looking for acronyms after your name or a degree after your name. What I would suggest is, like I said, start off with, attending these groups, network with people. This community is very small. So, you start networking with people and, you kind of get your name out there, you do some work. As far as minimum qualifications, it depends really on what you want to do. If you want to go red team and you want to do pen testing, then obviously you need to have a good skill set for that. If you want to go into governance, risk, and compliance, well then you obviously need to know a lot about the contractual and regulatory compliances that are out there. If you want to go security operations center, then you really need to focus on how to analyze and detect things that are coming out there. So if you don't really have a good focus on what you want to do yet, but you want to get into the industry, start going to groups, start networking, talking to some people. If you start narrowing it down from there, focus on the tool sets that you need and the experience you need to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
All right. Another question. Yes, sir.
So, in your recommendation, how do you best affect the organization that you're in if you're like security? How do you get management on board? How do you get the resources? So, what tools? How do you?
Great question. So the question was, how do you get management on board? How do you help really affect security and show value to, what you're proposing and, help drive that? Is that a good paraphrase? Okay. So a lot of management and a lot of C-levels, right? They they hear a lot of stuff in the industry or on CNN or in a trade mag or whatever. Unfortunately, there are managers out there who didn't come up in security. They took it as a management position. So it's harder, right, to kind of break in, so to speak, to drive what needs to be done for them. The easiest thing to do when you have a manager who may not be the most technical is overload them with facts, right? So if we don't, for example, if we don't do monitoring and detection, what does that mean? You know, we want to have something in place. We want to get a SIM, or we want to outsource, or we want to build our own security operations center. What happens if we don't? Because the first thing they're going to say is, well, why am I going to spend X amount of money on this when we haven't done it before, right? Well, what's the value add? You know, what's the return on the investment they're going to get? If you don't do this, you know, not that you have to use FUD, right? But if we don't do this, you know, here's the potential outcomes. If you're trying to drive new policies and procedures, and it affects the entire organization, why is that important? What's the benefit to that? If it's a new tool, for example, why is this tool important? If it's training, why is this training important? Now, it's easier said than done, right? It's easier to say, oh, show them the value. Sometimes they don't really want to look at it, or they don't want to hear it because they have their own agenda, or, you know, maybe you've been with the company for, you know, a year or two, and they're like, well, he's kind of the new guy. He doesn't really understand. I've been doing this for so long. I know more than he does. So then, you know, what does management like to see a lot of? Pretty charts and pretty pictures. It's the truth. Executive dashboards. So, you know, let's say you have you need to start a program for patch management, and you don't really have an official one. So you go out and you identify everything that is way out of line as far as patching, and you show them, okay, well, here's, you know, what we do now. We don't really have a current patch management cycle. We just kind of throw it out there. So because we do that and we don't really test it, here's everything that we have that's vulnerable right now, and here's the benefit if we actually implement this program, this patch management program, for example, and here's how we can do that. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
So how's being a CISO for a managed service provider different than maybe a hospital or a bank or somebody that might be your customer?
Sure, that's a great question. So the question was, how is being a CISO at a managed service provider different than a hospital or a traditional organization, traditional, you know, CISO role? It's a great question because, so for me anyway, my job isn't just your typical CISO role. It's also a lot of project management. It's a lot of working with clients, a lot of the GRC side. However, even though it is different, you get a good understanding, and you still have to have the knowledge of what your counterparts in a traditional organization do. Because a lot of times I have to interact with the CISO or the CSO or the manager of InfoSec or whatever it is. So you have to understand what's important to them. It may not be the same day-to-day role, but you still have to put yourself in that mindset and be able to speak to what's important to them and decisions and deadlines and budgets and everything else that goes with it.
So you find yourself part of sales as well as having to protect BDS's stuff too?
Actually, I'm lucky I'm not, because I'm not a salesperson. I'm on calls more as to kind of, depending on what level we're speaking with, I'm on the calls, but I don't do any of the actual sales. But I do work with the clients, kind of like as a post-sale to, you know, maintain the relationship from that point.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. At what point do you know to call for professional help?
At what point do I know to call professional help? I rely on professional help on a daily basis. It's true though, right? Because whether you don't have a lot of technical experience when you became in a management role like that, or even if you came up and you know it, let's face it, the higher you go in the food order, the less technical you actually are, because you're not doing that job anymore. Let's say you're a pen tester and you do that for 10, 15 years, and then now you're a manager. Well, you're not doing as much pen testing. And these skills, they can start to diminish. So I rely on technical help all the time. Some of the folks from BDS are right over here, and I would ask them stuff constantly. I use them as a resource all the time. And I think that's important. I mean, you bring up a good point where regardless of where you are in a management chain, you have those under you that are technical. That's their job. That's their focus. So you should rely on your people. You should have people, and you should trust your people to do what they need to do and seek their counsel as much as you think you need to. Answer your question? Yes, sir.
So how would you characterize the difference between a chief security officer and a chief information security officer? Those roles, and where do you see them living in the org chart?
Excellent question. So the question was, how do I characterize the difference between a chief security officer and a chief information security officer, and where they lie in an org chart? So, chief security officer not only has the information side, but they also have physical. Their focus is on all security as a whole. The chief information security officer is about the information itself, not necessarily anything with physical security or anything like that. Where I see them in the org chart, if a company has both, then the CISO is usually parallel. So if the CSO and the CISO both report to the CEO, for example, or the COO, then usually they ride parallel. If not, the CISO would go up through to the CSO. But a lot of it depends on the culture of the company and where they want them to fall. Sometimes I've seen it where a CSO reports through one chain of the org chart, and the CISO reports up through a different chain. Answer your question?
Sure.
Go ahead.
You just mentioned culture. What role do you see culture in playing in terms of securing an organization? And part two of that question is, do you have any tips for changing and governing the culture?
So, the culture of a company. Could you repeat the first part? I didn't.
Yeah. What role do you see culture playing in your role? Like, do you engage the culture to enforce or demand change?
So, what role does a CISO play as far as the culture goes? The CISO or any manager, honestly, should be very involved in the culture. Let's face it, we spend most of our lives at work. So you have to have a professional environment that's going to get the job done, but you also have to have one that people aren't going to be miserable when they come to work. So, part of that is policy driven, which a CISO is always involved in policy when it comes to anything that has to do with the information. But they should also be involved with dealing with the people. The personnel side is also a big part of being a CISO or at any management level. So you should be involved. You should know what's going on with your teams and with your leadership, and drive a culture of doing the right thing, being professional, but also making it a place where people want to work. As far as enacting change in the culture, again, going back to policy, a lot of that can be policy driven or procedurally driven. And as a CISO, it's easier to try to change culture because you can work with the rest of the C-suite. You can work with the rest of management. However, obviously, the lower you go down on the food chain, the harder it is to try to make those improvements, make those changes. But if you have a good management structure, and by that I don't mean organizationally, I mean the people who are actually in the roles, they really should listen to those that they manage, and take their feedback and take their information and try to do something with that to try to enact change. If there's some kind of cultural change that's needed, then you should listen to the folks that it's really going to affect. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Somebody over. Okay.
We talk a lot about GRC and pen testing here today, but is there a role for CISOs in software and hardware development? And if so, what is that role?
That's a great question. So, to make sure I understand the question correctly, talked a lot about pen testing and GRC today. And is there a role for the CISO when it comes to software and hardware development?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, there is actually. So, in our organization, for example, the software developers interact directly with the security operations folks. So there's a lot of interaction there, and in my specific role, security operations comes up through me. So we actually have a lot of meetings with the software developers. For the hardware side, we don't really do anything with hardware. However, it would be the same thing. It all boils down to security. Whether you're building a widget or you're building the application that runs the widget, security should be baked into that. It shouldn't be an afterthought. So yes, it's very important that the CISO or the CSO are involved with, having an input, because it is security and it applies to everything.
Looking ahead 5 years, how do you see the role of the CISO changing, and how do you build the skill set to anticipate and prepare for what that future looks like?
So the question is, looking ahead in the next 5 years, where do I see the role of a CISO, and where I see building the skill set to, in essence, get to that 5 years. So the next 5 years, I don't see it changing a whole lot, except for maybe a couple of pillars that are going to be new pillars that are going to be standing up, going in under the CISO. And as far as preparing for that role, or preparing for those changes, if you will, just like a lot of things in this industry, you got to stay current on what's going on and have a good understanding of it. We're going to see the roof cave in. We're going to see, a lot of other changes too, right? So, not that it's new, but mobile app, right? People have been doing mobile applications for a long time. However, a lot of companies are starting more and more to focus on their own mobile applications. Smaller, medium-sized businesses that 5 years ago would never even thought of, we need a mobile app. Well, now those companies are starting to build mobile apps. So where does that come into play? Is that just in software? Is that just in your programmer's area? Or is that going to become its own thing and branch into its own silo? Well, if that happens, how does the CISO involve themselves in that? How is that organization going to look, and how is it going to be ran? So, I don't see it changing a lot more than the way it is now, other than having more pillars, and then having to know how those pillars are going to run, how they're going to operate, and how you're going to staff and manage those accordingly. Does that answer your question? This gentleman right here.
Advancing to an executive level, did you take any business courses or MBA-related courses in addition to your technical background?
So the question was, advancing into the role I'm in now, did I take any college courses, MBA, anything like that? Me personally, I did not. There any military people in here? First off, thank you for your service. Thank you. Second of all, so in the military, at least in the Marine Corps, it's called a Mustang. It's somebody who is enlisted, and then they went to college, and then they became an officer. I'm sure that other branches have a word for it too. I kind of consider myself on that side. So my first job in IT was building PCs. And I just continue my progression forward. Now, does that mean that you can always do that without, taking that extra schooling and focus on, getting your MBA or, a master's or something like that? A lot of organizations require that. Do I personally think it's necessary? It's hard to tell, honestly. Me personally, I would take somebody with good experience, good knowledge, over somebody who, just got out of college and they have a degree, but they haven't really done the work. But that's me. A lot of companies, like I said, it's a requirement. There's a box to check. Does this person have a master's degree? Yes, check. So it's a personal call. Me personally, I didn't make that call, so. Yes, sir.
So to follow on with that, I have my own opinion on that particular matter. As a cybersecurity executive in any company, one of the things that I like to do is reach out to my business peers to ask for their input in order to guide my organization in the direction. So you're probably going to hear it a lot today: security is a team sport, that sort of thing. As an executive leader, you have to lean on those around you and those who report to you in order to get it done.
Absolutely.
So we mentioned mentioned a little bit about the different roles of CISO versus CISO. What's your opinion on security independence, especially reporting for like a functional role like IT? And you think that can be achieved with reporting through those avenues?
So the question was, talking about, for example, the role of the CISO in security independence, and for example, going up through IT or a different organization or a different arm in the org chart. Is that okay? Me personally, I've been in organizations where the CISO went up through the IT pillar, and I've been in one where it actually went up through finance. I don't think that information security, and in whatever way, shape, or form you're calling it, should actually go through IT for independence. If there's a risk area, honestly, I think it should go up through the risk area. Or if operations, if you have a COO, for example, and he runs operations, and then you have a CIO and he runs IT, for example. Well, security should not go into the same bucket, if you will, as IT. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is you don't get that true independence of security and IT. Because honestly, when it comes to what matters, whoever runs IT is going to focus on that. Security is going to be a second, let's face it, because they're going to focus on the technology, what needs to be done, how are we going to service our customers or our internal partners better, and security is going to take a backseat to that. If you have it in risk, which, let's face it, that they understand risk, they understand the importance of a lot of what we do. So that's where I see security being the most effective, is under a risk pillar or under an operational pillar. Answer your question? Yeah, go ahead.
What's your opinion on encryption and law enforcement with Apple and the FBI?
Great question. So let's see. I'm going to answer this first as Jamie Murdock. Hell no. Hell no. It leads to a lot of problems, right? Because it's not just a phone. It's not just a couple of phones. And it's not just something they can turn on and then turn off. It's something that has to be built in a lot of the times. And that can be abused not only by law enforcement, but by anyone who ends up popping that, right? So I just think it's bad practice. I think that it's not something that our government should, push down anyone's throat. Professionally, no. I don't think it's a good idea because it puts in another avenue that could affect all products. It adds a large potential liability and a large vulnerability and a huge brand reputation nightmare. So those are my two answers to that. Any other questions?
I've got a quick question.
Yes.
So you brought up a term earlier called return on investment. As a CISO, define it. And in relation to security.
Sure. So return on investment. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's I put this money, time, effort, and here is what the outcome is. So before I look at something, I'm going to look at, here's everything that it's going to cost me in money, time, resources, and here's what I'm going to get out of it. Well, here's the problem. 9 times out of 10, security is a burden, which means you don't make money off of it. It's something that's paid, and you end up just having to eat it, in the minds of, people who count dollars for a living. So as a CISO, how do you quantify that? How do you actually take this intangible and say, yeah, it was worth it? So kind of like what I talked about a little bit before. Let's say that somebody on my team wants to implement something, a new procedure, a new widget, a new piece of software that runs the new widget. The first thing I do is say, because I got to look at dollars and cents too, how much is this going to cost? It's going to cost X amount. Okay. what are the resources needed to get this done? Well, we need these three people to do it. Okay, how long is it going to take? Well, if they work solely on this, then it's going to take them each 40 hours. Okay, what do we get out of this? And then is this beneficial or not? And unfortunately, a lot of programs, whether it's security or whether it's operational or IT, you can put them in the budget and they're going to get cut. I have my managers every year say, give me your Christmas list. This is, just imagine you're 5 years old and you're asking Santa for whatever it is that you want. I said, give me that. Give me the cost, the time, and what we get out of it. And then I look through that, and then I'll redline stuff. And then I take it, I move it up the chain, and they'll redline stuff. That happens all the time. So if you want a program pushed through, you really need to show what that return is. If you just say, this would be really cool for us to have, it would help us out a lot. Awesome. How? Because it's a blinky box and we won't get hacked. Okay, well, that's redlined. You have to show a good value to it. Cool. Awesome. Well, again, thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks for the questions that you had. If you want to chat with me later, I'll be here all day. So enjoy the rest of BSides. Yeah, I do. Let me on mic.